I don't know. But did I mess that up? Do I start all over again because I just pressed the button? We're good. All right. Good morning, everyone. I want to thank everybody for coming out here on this rainy day for this work session. This is basically a work session to kind of discuss HB 487 that we passed last year. I know that this subject matter has a lot of opinions on both sides. So last year we did the best we could in a short period of time to move some policy forward with some, I guess with some of the pieces of that policy kind of having a little bit of a timeline so that all the parties involved could come back together over the summer in the interim to formulate a piece of policy that works for everybody, that works for the state, works for people of the state of Maryland, works for the towers, works for the shippers, works for everybody. So, so this meeting today is pretty much designed to get everybody to kind of see where we are as far as compromise on some of these really larger kind of issues. I know it can be contentious. The meeting today is a work group, so it's really not designed for people to work out or talk about their grievances as much as it is to be extraordinarily productive. We have an hour today, maybe a couple extra minutes here or there, to work through these issues in a very productive manner. And I think it's important that everybody looks forward, and works toward coming to a conclusion or coming to an agreement in which all parties walk away happy, all parties walk away a little bit unhappy, and for the most part, everybody can live with the policy that we come up with. I want to assure everybody that there are several scenarios that can work out in this work group. This work group can yield, hopefully, a conclusion that everybody agrees with. It could yield no conclusion. Hopefully, that's not the case. And it may yield a bill for the 2023 session, or it may not yield a bill for the 2023 session. Our preference is that the parties involved that know the subject matter best work to come up with a piece of policy that works for everyone. Of course, we want to ensure that the towers can make a living and that they're happy moving forward, and we want to ensure that the shippers also can ensure that they aren't in any particular situation they're paying a fair rate for their tow job. So with that said, I'm going to pass it to Delegate Foley, as this was originally her bill. So Delegate Foley is really as close as we have to the subject matter expert on this policy, and I know that she's been working in the interim with all the parties involved, and I know she wants to make an opening statement, and then we'll do some quick introductions, and then we'll go from there. Delegate Foley.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Again, and I'm not going to spend a long time reiterating what Delegate David Fraser Hidalgo said, but I just wanted to emphasize what he said about reaching an agreement. I think it's really important. Really important for the parties in this room to reach an agreement. We, as he indicated, we're going to be watching this and we're going to be tracking this issue during the upcoming session. And if we don't, get an agreement, we may look at doing something ourselves, passing some legislation. We may not. We may just leave things the way they are. But our preference is that we really want the parties in this room to reach an agreement. Delegate Fraser Hidalgo said that I'm an expert. I'm not an expert on this. You are the experts on this. So we really need your help to get us to a point where we have good policy around these issues. And that's really, I want us to think about this as us working together as a team to get there. I know you have different points of view and you have different, issues that you need to address, and we certainly understand that. but I really want us to look at this as a team with the legislators, Delegate Frazier Hidalgo and I and our Senate colleagues being a part of that team to get to a point where we have a good policy on police initiated towing in Maryland. I will be listening today for, where you think you can reach agreements, but also I'll be listening to see where maybe there are some points where you can come together that you haven't thought about. So our job here is just to convene this meeting and to listen to you and to help mediate any disputes that there are around the issues. But we really need you to do, so to speak, the heavy lifting here and get to a point where you reach an agreement. Thank you. And thank you again for being here today.
One thing I forgot to mention is this is being streamed on the General Assembly website, and it is being recorded. So just for everybody to know, it's a great opportunity for you to go back should you need to, and for those millions of people at home that are watching, welcome to the work group, and also for all the members here today. You can always look back at what we discussed today to try and make sure you understand an issue or review an issue. With that said, let's go through some very, very quick introductions, and I'm going to go to my right, and then we'll go around, and then we'll go to the left.
Patrick Tracy, the House ENT Committee Counsel.
I'm Josh Prada, Senate Judicial Proceedings.
Dwayne Rager, here representing Vice Chair Waldstreicher from the Judicial Proceedings Committee, and he was the Senate sponsor for the bill.
Yep. Evan Shirelli, Legislative Director for Delegate Frazier Hidalgo.
Petra Smeltzer, Chief of Staff to Delegate Foley.
Okay, so let's go ahead and start. Just to go ahead and start, Andrea, Andrea Mansfield is going to kind of start from her perspective from the towers, and then Lewis, you will be up. You're welcome to come on, sit up together if you like.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Delegate Foley, and the others. Thank you. It's good to see everyone today. Actually, nice to see people in person. We're going back to that. Andrea Mansfield with Manus Canning and Associates, representing the Towing and Recovery Association of Maryland. There are several of the Maryland members here sitting behind me. Jeff Hurley, he's the president of the association. Vince Fluke, he's vice president. Ted Dent chairs the legislative committee, and Charlie Parrish helps with the legislative committee, and he's more, I guess I'll say, resident expert in some respects. But they are here, and if there are specific questions, Charlie will help answer those for the committee. Really want to thank you for bringing us together today to have this conversation. Towards the end of session last year, as you know, yes, the bill was amended. There were two provisions specifically that the implementation date were delayed until October of 2023. We also did the letter, as you know, which brought us here today, to give the opportunity to discuss some specific issues, as well as collect some data during the interim. And we reached that agreement or conclusion with the expectation that we would be able to come back and have the conversations to specifically revisit those two items in the bill that were delayed, one dealing with the prohibition on per-pound billing, which would take effect October 1 of 2023, as well as if there is a genuine dispute, that there would be 20% of based on the invoice price or 20% of the payment. That provision was also delayed. So I know there was quite a bit of floor discussion in the Senate on that point, and I think it was made very clear in those discussions that those two items would be a part of this work group discussion that took place. So with that, we did, actually Lewis and I, talking and trying to plan for all of this, we kind of served, I'll say co-chairs, so to speak, but co-organizers to bring the parties together. We thought that way it gave, the towers were represented, motor truck was represented, and the other side, we could bring together and have conversations. So we organized a meeting. We did have one meeting that was towards, I guess, middle to the end of August. I can't remember the date right now, but we did go through the letter. We did begin having a discussion on issues that we thought we wanted to address as a part of the work group. We also discussed the data. I will say, and I know Lewis will speak, I think in trying to come up with the realm of issues we thought should be part of the discussion. I think we probably did have a little bit of a disagreement on what those would be, which is really why we really appreciate you being a part of the conversation at this point in time. We were successful, though, in collecting some data, and I know in preparing for this meeting, Lewis did provide that all to the staff, and I think that has been distributed to everyone. So we did collect from the state police the list of all the towing companies that they work with. That is separated by barracks, by county. We were successful in getting some information from the Maryland Insurance Administration on the types of complaints that they have been receiving, and I'll talk about that in a little more detail in a moment. There was some information gathered from the state of Colorado on what they did. We also had a rate sheet that was submitted from the state of Montana, from a towing company, that kind of shows how they break down their rate sheet and so forth. So all that has been compiled and is there for background information for these discussions. I think where my client and the issues that they would like to see revisited, really the two I've already mentioned. We have had a chance to talk about some of the issues since that time. Oh, I guess I should back up just 1 second. So we had our meeting in August, and we were having conversations to schedule a second meeting. Unfortunately, we were not able to come up with dates that worked for all parties for a second meeting. But also with trying to determine the issues that we felt we should be discussing, since we didn't seem to have agreement on that. We also felt that probably having you help us in that process and help mediate some of that would be advantageous for all parties. So that's kind of what brought us here today. So we did have the one meeting to gather the data. I know we've talked a couple of times and trying to pull some things together, but we have not had all the parties sit down since that August meeting. So today's the first day that all parties are being represented to have those conversations again. And I guess I can go ahead if I can put the issues on the table that my client would like to revisit, if that's
okay. Let me say this because I didn't mention this in the beginning, and that is, I'm sure everybody here knows, but not all the millions of people back home may not know, that the work group was put together because the chair of this committee, Chair Barve, and Chair Smith put together a letter, and most of you probably have that letter, but it has certain stipulations as to who they would like to be in the work group and what the subject matter of that work group are. To include the number of towers in the Maryland State Police tow list, parameters for establishing a fair and reasonable per pound billing rates for policy maintain initiated towing services, adequacy of charges, number of nature of complaints filed with the Maryland State Police. We do have the Maryland State Police here, so thank you very much for being here. The number and nature of insurance complaints filed with the Maryland Insurance Administration, which is why our list of folks for the work group is so great. The Towing Recovery Professionals of Maryland, the Towing Recovery Association of America, the Maryland Motor Truck Association, the Owner-Operated Independent Drivers Association, the American Property Casualty Insurance Association, the Maryland State Police, and the Maryland Insurance Administration. So we should have all the parties here necessary to go forward. Okay, so Andrea, go ahead. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay, no problem. Thank you for laying that out. Yes, and I think from my client's perspective, yes, the data and the information to be gathered in that letter would help inform further discussions with respect to the two items that were delayed within the bill. So those two items specifically, I mentioned per pound billing, and that the prohibition not taking effect until October 1 of 2023. We have discussed that issue further, and one approach that my client suggested is that maybe there could potentially be separate rate sheets. Towing could be hourly. The recovery, since the recoveries, that's what really requires the different types of equipment. That's when if it's a tractor trailer or a larger vehicle and you need to use a wrench or certain types of equipment to turn that over for the recovery, or maybe gathering whatever cargo spilled during that unfortunate accident. That could be where we could look at other. It would not be a prohibition, but if a towing company chose to use per pound billing, that could be an option. So we felt maybe breaking those two types of situations out could be a more clear way and a more, fair and equitable way to deal with the prohibition on per pound billing and substitute that. The other issue is, as I mentioned, the release of the vehicle with 20% of the payment on the invoice that was also delayed in the bill. That does, my client does have concerns with that language still. I think there is language that part of the Federal Aviation Administration Authorization Act that actually preempts that there are requirements placed on the type of on invoice charges and pricing. There is an exemption for state and local authorities as a part of that act, and they have the authority to set prices. But in this situation, it's, we're not actually setting prices in this bill. Rate sheets need to be submitted to the state police. That would then be followed, and those would be made available and publicly available to the all parties if they would like to see those. But we're not actually setting rates specifically. I think further complicating the issue, and this was something that the Maryland Insurance Administration data pointed out, and I know this data, they do keep stats on the number of complaints that come into them. There were 90 complaints that dated back from 2018. Now, it is true that that data, it's not broken out by vehicle type, so it could be light-duty vehicles, it could be regular vehicle cars that all of us are driving, or it could be the heavy-duty and medium-duty towing that's being referred to in the bill. But out of those 90 complaints, they were able to reach a resolution on 55 of those complaints. However, when a resolution is reached, it's a negotiated process, and in those cases, it's some portion of a bill. Like the average payment, according to their statistics, was $3,715. So we don't actually know what the invoices were going into that discussion, but we know there was some amount of payment, but probably not the full price of the invoice. But out of those 90, there were 11 complaints where the at-fault vehicle was uninsured. There were 8 where the at-fault vehicle carried minimum limits, meaning that the insurance coverage was not sufficient to cover the cost of the towing and recovery charges. There were 10 where there was a valid denial, and then complaints where the MIA lacked jurisdiction. There were 6, and in that situation, that means that the vehicle owners, they were insured in other states to where the Maryland Insurance Administration didn't have authority to direct the individual to pay or have the insurance company pay those claims. The towing companies in those situations were referred to the other insurance administrations in those other states to help recoup those claims. So within those numbers, as I said, 55, there was some resolution with some payment being made, but in talking with them for more detail, I mean, there are several scenarios in there, I mean, potentially, maybe not all 27, but there were several scenarios in there that maybe towers were not paid. I mean, maybe they had to litigate for payment, or maybe they signed that off as a loss. So I think those numbers, and again, we don't know how many were heavy duty and medium duty towing within those numbers, but there do seem to be some situations here where, I mean, towers, if there's no recourse or they're only getting 20% of the invoice, they could be significantly impacted by that and what they're able to recoup for their costs, cleaning up, the accident debris and so forth. The other issue that they would like your consideration of refers to the releasing of the cargo, and not that they won't release the cargo, but in looking at that more specifically, I think it did raise a number of issues as well as some liability issues for them, because if they go out, they do the recovery, they bring the containers, they bring whatever cargo back to their tow yard, and the owners of those want to come and kind of collect those items. It's like, how does that work? Does the towing company, is it their staff, is it their equipment that is used to do that? Does the trucking company or the owner of the cargo, do they bring their individuals and staff and team or equipment to come and get that? I guess either way, if it's the towing company providing that service, there's costs associated with that there's not sure how they would be covered, or if that would be a part of this, or would that be an additional cost. But if it's the the truck driving company or the cargo owner bringing in their own teams and equipment, that presents other liability issues for the towing owners, letting those individuals come onto their storage yards, and if someone is injured or hurt, there's liability issues there. So those are some more of the process things that my client would like to raise for discussion to determine what's the best way to handle some of those things. And with that, I think those are kind of the 3 issues, and I guess I'll stop there for questions. And as I mentioned, Mr. Parrish is here. If there's more specific down in the details, then he'll be able to respond to those.
Great, we
those
can dig in later when we get to it. Thank you. Mr. Campion, you are on.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, Louis Campion with Maryland Motor Truck Association. I'm joined by Gene Funk from Cowan Systems, the largest Maryland domiciled trucking company in the state. Not to reiterate what Andrea has already said, right? We did meet in August. We requested a lot of data from the state police, the insurance administration, the owner-operator independent drivers association, the towers, and the like that you all have. We don't believe that it sufficiently illustrated a need to revisit many of the provisions of this bill because, as Andrea has already indicated, the data was not segregated by type of vehicle towed. The state police complaint process really couldn't identify whether complaints were related to medium or heavy duty tows or whether they were passenger car tows. The MIA, the Insurance Administration's data, similarly did not reflect whether those were medium and heavy duty tows or car tows. Some of the items that we did talk about where there's an opportunity, I think, for further discussion, very much around what is a genuine dispute or a reasonable dispute, right? When we want to take advantage of that 20% backstop, which we think is absolutely necessary. Per pound billing criteria, are there criteria that could be established that would allow for per pound billing to be a legal charging mechanism? But just as a reminder, we passed this legislation because we were trying to offer, some basic consumer protections and what really has been the Wild West on a scenario where we had no choice. One of the major aspects of this bill is that it does give us, as trucking company consumers, choice in the selection of the tower. And that if we have that choice, all of the provisions of this law do not take effect any longer because I am contracting with that tower myself as opposed to the state police doing that. In other areas where the state actually requires you to use a certain provider, they set rates. And Andrea talked about rates. We would have actually loved to have set rates as opposed to get into 20% and this or that. So we'd be really interested in a discussion further if the towers are interested in setting rates. Just the reason why this backstop, if I can illustrate why this backstop is so important to us, is because we have gotten copies of the rate sheets from the state police that have been on file. And just to give you a sense, for the exact same piece of equipment, one tower charges $865 an hour. One tower charges $2,500 per hour. One tower charges $9,500 per hour. Another tower charges $52,000 per hour with a 4-hour minimum and a 10% fuel surcharge, guaranteeing that on any recovery that they will have a bill in excess of $200,000. And that's why we must have some backstop if we're not going to set rates. And so, I just do remind you that this is a voluntary program. No tower has to participate in this program. We know that towers are necessary. Many of them provide good services. We have some that our members like to use and are absolutely treated very fairly. But you can see the sort of range and challenge that we deal with, and that's why we needed this piece of legislation. And I'll just stop there and turn it over to Senator Middleton.
Thank you very much. Chairman Frazier Hidalgo, it's a pleasure being here, Madam Foley, Delegate Foley. I'm here today representing OIDA, which stands for the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Their representative, Doug Morse, is unable to be here today. He had planned to be here, but he came down with the flu. Also with me is Ellen Valentino from Cornerstone. We represent OIDA. And just a little background information. When going into this, we combined forces with Maryland Motor Truck Association because of these egregious charges. And our membership are independent drivers. A lot of them are large carriers. A lot of them are small mom-and-pop operations. And to get some of these horrendous towing bills can put them out of business. So some of the stuff that has been mentioned, my client feels that we need to have something in place that keeps the towers honest. It's not in our interest to put any tower out of business. We realize the need to have towers when these accidents happen and the equipment and stuff has got to be removed. They play a vital part in that. All we want is just a fair playing ground to remove some of the bad players that are out there. And so we started out at the onset looking at how do we tackle this whole entire thing? And we looked at something that's already in place, and we've been through this before, but since this is being televised, not a little bit of the history of it, Maryland Transportation Authority has something in place already that we wanted to model after. You know, we inventoried our members, as did Maryland Motor Truck, and to date there hasn't been one single complaint that we know of against the program that's in place right now with the Maryland Motor Truck Association. They have an ample supply of towers that are signed up to remove any of those vehicles on the tolled facilities. That's been no problem, and there's been no concern about the rates that have been set. So that's initially what we wanted to do. We wanted to model after that. But because of the objections from some of the towers, as well as the implications of it for the Maryland State Police, we went another route. And this 20% down, Delegate Foley, it started out, as you remember, an amendment to the bill to look at what I believe it's Mississippi, one of the states that had a 5%. We, following your wishes, we started negotiating with the towers, and we got that up to 20%. And we feel that that's an adequate amount. And but you know, if it's the wishes, and this is where our client is, if it's the wishes of you that we look at that whole 20% down, we're willing to work on that as long as we have another trade-off that gives us, our membership, some protection. So we're willing to look at that whole entire issue. We started out with the whole per pound billing. That was something that had been recently introduced, and our membership showed that that has been gotten outrageous. And we're willing to look at that issue as long as the proper guardrails are put in place. So as we move further with that, that's certainly something that we're willing to work with. Some of the issues that Andrea raised about if once a truck or equipment is in their storage lots, the liability issues, I think those are issues that we can work out to address the liability issues and whatnot. I don't know that they have to be done legislatively. So those are the main concerns that we wanted to, put on the table. So thank you very much for, putting this work group together.
I'm going to recognize Delegate Foley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for that summary. That was very good on all your parts, summarizing where we are. I have a few questions, again, in the interest of trying to bring us together, listening closely to what the parties said. So most of my questions are for Andrea, but I think I have questions for all three of you. So Andrea, when you were talking about separate rate sheets, and you were talking about one, I assume, for the towing itself, and then one for the recovery. So talk a little bit more about that. How would you envision, would you envision, what would you envision those rate sheets to be? Published rate sheets that the state police would publish? When you talked about that, how would you envision that working?
The state police, and they could be made public. Yes, I think that would be what my client envisions. There would be hourly rates for the towing. And I think right now, probably some of the towing companies submit their rate sheets in a slightly differently. Some may itemize them out. So if it was, I don't know, and I'm not going to get the names of the equipment right. Sorry, guys. But like a rotator or a winch or whatever, it would be priced out a certain way. And I know it's honestly, some use price per pound, some do not use price per pound right now. But those things could be itemized in a way so you could actually see if it's this type of equipment, this is the gross vehicle weight of the vehicle, it would be priced in this manner. It would provide that detail, yes.
Yeah, I have a question too. Go ahead.
I'm not used to being in person.
Don't press the
Okay,
button.
sorry. Okay. All right, thank you for that. I have Delegate Frazier Hidalgo has some questions too. But did I hear you say, Andrea, that the Federal Aviation Administration has an authorization act that has some bearing on this? I didn't understand that part.
Yeah, and maybe I can let Charlie speak more specifically to that.
please.
Come on up, Charlie. It's good to
Let's
see
have
you.
him slide a chair.
Yep, just slide a chair up. It's good to see you, not on Zoom. In your office, I remember all those Zooms with you in your office. Yep, I remember. So
It's very nice to meet you all in person again.
It is
good to be
nice.
down. Thank you. The Federal Aviation Act of '94, when it didn't realize that first off, it included all transportation, which was the towing industry. And I've been specializing in non-consensual towing for over 30 years, so it's the rough form of the 4 acts of towing. So in '95, when the Congressional House spoke, and actually I have that record with me. If it's okay if I just read, it's very short, 2 paragraphs. That way I'm not misspeaking.
Yeah, that's good. Just so everybody knows, we have until 12. We've budgeted an hour. We might go over a little bit.
Very short. The pending legislation talking about the Federal Aviation Act, FAA-4, would restore the local authority to engage in regulating the prices charged by tow trucks in non-consensual towing situations, regulations of routes and services, as well as regulation of consensual towing would still be preempted. Non-consensual towing situations are those where the owner of the vehicle is unable to consent to it being towed, such as in cases of severe accident where the vehicle is towed from commercial property or illegally parked or towed from city streets as a result of a police order. I would note that with the restoration of the authority of local units of government to regulate prices charged for non-consensual towing, the Congress fully expects that any rate so established be compensatory and reasonable. And that was Mr. Raha that made that statement. And by the bill that you've done, and I've never, in all my times coming up here, I've always agreed we should have rates, and I've worked with the local authorities and divisions and municipalities for non-consensual. In this bill, though, you're allowing a third party with the 20% to dictate my rate. My rate, by giving it to the state police, that authority to which is accepting that race has now set my maximum. And if I may say so too, the rates that were read off, those are not the rates that are actually being charged. Due to this bill that came out, a lot of the towers, because antitrust laws were not allowed to discuss pricing, a lot of the towers is inclusive. The towing is not the issue, it's the recovery. Could include a forklift, a low buoy, manpower. You know, we're picking up stuff off the side of the road, dumpsters, bucket trucks. So a lot of these pricing that they're giving is an all-inclusive because we don't know. Last thing we want to do is go to a scene, have to bring out specialized equipment, and because it's not on that rate sheet per hour, I can't charge it, which we fully accept that. We know that. So a lot of towers, depending on the area where they're at, those prices that he read out is an all-inclusive price.
Okay. That's did you have a follow-up or I have a question or two? Good. Well, let me ask this very quickly in the meantime. I remember we had a conversation about this, and I know the state police are here, so the troopers are here. MDTA does their own, right? They do this. So if someone could refresh my memory, that might be the Maryland State Police. I've heard talk about setting rate sheets, which they do. Is there a particular reason why the Maryland State Police aren't playing a more active role as MDTA does? And I don't know if that's for the state police, if you want to come up and chime in, or you want to wait and hear what the answer is. Sure, please. Thank you.
I do have my expert in the back if you have specific questions, but I have been appraised of it. MDTA chose to establish a rate sheet 10 years ago. It's never been updated. Am I not
Just
close
grab
enough?
that mic and put it, there you go.
Okay. I'm sorry. Michael Brady with Maryland State Police. MDTA did establish a rate sheet 10 years ago. They haven't updated it. We have consulted with them on how they came up with those numbers, and nobody who still exists there can give us the answer. They're not happy with what's going on, and I don't want to advocate for towers, truckers, or anyone else. We're a third party. We don't know what an appropriate rate would be, and I think the appropriate way to come up with those rates is between these three parties. MDTA has established those rates in Comar and are looking to get rid of them, to be quite honest, because once you put something in Comar, it's a world's worth of work to change it, so that's why they haven't. We think the most appropriate way for towers and truckers to come to appropriate rates is for them to do it. I couldn't tell you if $100 is appropriate, or would you say $54,000 an hour? I don't know. And I don't think we are in the profession of being able to establish that fairly to everybody.
So, Mike, do you know, is MDTA talking about updating those fees, or they went out altogether?
They went out.
Do you have any does anybody from anybody else from state police have a comment on how MDTA, maybe this is a specific question for them, how do they anticipate moving forward if they have no rate sheets?
Do you know? Okay. I would certainly defer to somebody more knowledgeable.
I actually had a meeting, and actually the president, Jeff, was in that meeting as well, Monday morning, with the captain of the MDTA, who recognized that the fees were from 2009 and implemented in 2010. They do not want to set the rates. He's made it very clear. So he has asked me to work on the rates, bring them back to him, have justification for him, and he's going to support it.
With input from all the parties
involved. To put into Comar, yes.
Are you aware of these, Louis?
So I actually had a similar conversation with that likely same individual who heads commercial vehicle enforcement for the Transportation Authority, and he did make me aware that he was going to put that request in of the towers. We acknowledge that those rates were set now 13 years ago and should be in need of revision and updating. We have not been asked to be part of that process, however. And
let me just say, yes. The reason I ask all this is because objectively speaking, all the parties should be involved in whatever that rate is, so everybody can agree. Any other comment, or I think I have answers to most of my questions. Mike, you and I can follow up a little bit later, but go ahead, Delegate Foley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have questions on a couple of other things. Again, Andrea, you referenced, you went through the data on the complaints, and thank you for that. That was very instructive. And I appreciate that, some of those tows are not within the scope of this bill. And that's a problem. They're not broken out. I understand that. But you did mention that there was a negotiation process on some of those complaints, and you seem to highlight that a little bit, that there was actually a negotiation. Would I take that to mean that maybe you and your client would be open to having some sort of negotiation process. I'm not proposing anything here, I'm just asking. Some sort of negotiation process to resolve disputes? Is that what you were saying in highlighting that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I wasn't saying that specifically. I was more just trying to describe that is how the Insurance Administration handles that. If there is a complaint that is filed with them, they try to negotiate it between the parties. I do think that within state police and how their structure is now, there is a negotiation process that exists. I think also some of the towing companies themselves, if there is an issue that arises with an invoice, I think they will also negotiate with the customer, trying to come up with a reasonable resolution.
Okay, thank you. And then another on a different issue. Again, Andrea, I'm not putting you on the spot. I just was listening to what you were saying. I do have a couple questions for Louis as well. On the issue of releasing the cargo, I understand about the concerns about the 20% and heard all of that. But you also talked about the liability issues and how the work gets done in terms of removing the cargo. Maybe this is just my not understanding how the process works on recovery, but what was done previously before this bill? So if were there situations where cargo was released and the vehicle was still impounded, or I mean, what was done before this bill was enacted on that issue?
Specifically for state police tows, I'm going to ask Charlie to respond to that question. This is
Well, actually, under COMAR for impoundment.
yeah, but Charlie, this is MDTA language, though.
Right, but I mean, it's pretty much the same language that's followed. We were following COMAR along with it, and under 11.07.03.14, impoundment, B, the permittee, which is the tower, shall be authorized to recover the cost of towing and storage from the owner or other legally authorized claimant before releasing the impounded vehicle and personal property. So we got paid for it, or they would take it to court to get a replevin for it, which has happened. That answers your question.
I'm not, I don't want to belabor this. Maybe we can talk about this offline. But as I understood, what Andrea was talking about was that there was a liability issue with respect to removing the cargo. And I'm just asking, what happened before? So maybe there weren't situations where the cargo was removed and the vehicle remained. But, what happened before this bill was passed?
And I guess my follow-up to that, because you may or may not know the answer, maybe, Mike, I don't know if you know what MDTA does, but what happens when there is cargo, like from a liability perspective? That's what you're trying to get at, right?
That's what I'm trying to get at.
You raised the liability, but that's got to be an ongoing issue.
Right, that was an issue before this bill was passed, I'm sure.
Right. I'm sorry, to be clear. So there's the MDTA, COMAR regulations for MDTA, there's a section dealing specifically with impoundment that allows the towing company to recoup those costs. So they come in, the storage costs, costs associated with collecting the cargo, the equipment, and so forth. I think what Charlie was saying is that's the same process that state police was also following. So if stuff was in their tow yards, the company coming in to collect the equipment or the cargo and so forth, they've been recouping those costs to do that.
It was one thing. By this bill, you're identifying the cargo to be released on demand. Well, that cargo is in a container. So now that's either the trailer, an open bed, an enclosed. So in order for them to get that cargo, it's got to be a mechanism that's either going to put us at liability risk or additional costs to be able to help them to get that cargo, because we're not releasing the vehicle for free as well.
Okay. So the answer is that you didn't do that before, really.
Correct.
You released them both. Okay. I'm clear now. Thank you. And then finally, Mr. Chairman, if I may, I do have a question for Mr. Campion. I think I heard you say that you would be open to some sort of rate setting on the per pound billing. Did I hear that correctly? And do you have any vision for what that would be?
We would be amenable to rate setting. We think rate setting would actually be much more favorable to provide some consistency, regardless of the mechanism that the bill is calculated by if there are rate provisions. It's why with the Transportation Authority, we haven't had that these kinds of issues in the past. And claims that we're setting rates by the 20% actually don't recognize all the language in the bill, because the bill very clearly says that the motor carrier is still liable for the full amount. Nothing, if I choose to pay the 20%, right, we haven't set their rates, and I pay the 20% because I'm disputing the amount. It says very clearly that it doesn't absolve me of further financial responsibility for the remaining invoice. They just don't get to hurl my cargo and my equipment and demand payment with some of the, at some of the levels that we have seen. So we actually think rate setting could provide a great resolution to this entire challenge.
Mr. Middleton, do you have any comment on what?
Yeah, just thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow up on what Louis just said, it's very important to my client, because imagine a mom and pop operation, your tractor, your trailer, and your equipment, everything is impounded. And you've got to negotiate, come up with the money, or else you can't get it. They need to get back on the road. That's what they need. And that's where this 20% down, where they can get in touch with the insurance company, get the 20% down, get back on the road, and then the tower can still come after them. It just allows them to get back on the road rather than being held hostage for however long. And as far as the liability issue, again, I'll go back to that. That's kind of getting down in the weeds, but I think those things could be addressed and need to be addressed, and we can have further discussions with them. Because I certainly recognize that if somebody's coming on my property with their piece of equipment, there's a liability exposure to me. So that's a legitimate concern that I think we can work out.
Well, theoretically, maybe some of that could be set in rate, in the rate sheet. Okay, so from what I just heard, Andrea, for you, and is there some common ground with potential rate sheets?
Sounds like we need to work through those details. Yes. Yes.
Okay. All right, I did want to turn to, we have representatives from the chair of JPR and the vice chair of JPR. Chair and Vice Chair, do you have any questions on behalf of Senator Smith or Senator Wallstreicher? Is there anything that they specifically asked you to? You guys, you both are good. Okay. Sure. One more question. Okay, so not to go totally off the wheels, I would say rails, but off the wheels on this, but I do know that there are a number of people that have come. So I think that we've kind of exhausted this line of questioning, and I think that we've potentially found some common ground, which we can, you guys can work on later. Is there anything specifically, briefly, that anybody else, any other statements that anybody else that hasn't been able to say anything yet would like to make? I'm talking like a minute or less. Anybody else? Or does everybody feel like they've been adequately and well represented by their representatives?
I've got a lot to say, but I'll just leave it short to the minute. But so as far as the 20%,
sir, if you could state your name and actually move the microphone to your.
Vince Flook, second VP of Tow and Recovery Professionals of Maryland. Anyway, my biggest thing here is the 20%. So that gives the mom and pop an opportunity to get back on the road. What about the mom and pop tower that doesn't get paid for their services? How do we go after? So we've done a job. Now we got 20% of the money. Now we got to hire an attorney to go after these people. I can tell you, I've got one I got to go to court for January 4th. It's taken me 4 years to get a court date, and I'm going to wind up with a judgment, a default judgment, because these people haven't even answered the lawsuit. So I'm going to get a default judgment for cleaning up the state's highway, and then I have 4 years in the makings, and then after that, I've got a piece of paper that's good for 12 years. I may never collect a nickel on. So my question is, when somebody comes to my yard, gives me 20%, takes all their stuff, what is my mechanism to get them back into the state of Maryland so I can collect on the rest of my bill if it is in fact a legitimate bill?
Yeah, understood. Understood. I think that those issues were raised during the hearings last year, and thank you for reiterating them, because I think it's important for people to know that to know what you just said. Thank you, sir.
Good morning. I'm Herman Funk. I'm with Cowan Systems in Baltimore, and I wanted to address a couple of things. First, to respond to the comments that were just.
If you could please grab that mic and pull it a little bit closer to you, and just
Is that better?
restate. Yeah, and just restate your name.
Okay,
again.
Herman Funk. I'm with Cowan Systems in Baltimore. To respond to the point that was just made, this is hard. This whole situation is difficult. He's got a legitimate point. He doesn't get paid unless he holds the equipment and the cargo hostage for some people.
So yeah, and
But
just so you know, we in this committee last year or earlier this year in the hearings, we really try to not use the term hostage. What we're trying to do is make sure that everybody is operating on a level where it's all goodwill all the way across. We're not assuming anything. So
Okay.
I think that the proper way to say it would probably be to ensure that they actually get paid their fair wage, right?
Okay.
Thank you.
I will abide by your wishes, but with all due respect, I disagree with your premise. I don't think that all of this is being done in good faith.
Well, that's what we're here to. Sir, that's what we're here to do today in this work group and moving forward, is to ensure that everybody is working in good faith. And if somebody is not working in good faith, then we really have a problem moving forward with policy. So the assumption here right now is that everybody in this room is working in good faith to help clear the roads for the drivers in the state of Maryland, to make sure that it's safe for people and make sure all parties involved are compensated appropriately. So that's where we are.
All right, thank you. Again, to address his point, it's a valid point, but and this points out the difficulty of this whole situation. On the other side, if you have a small trucking company and they have $200,000 worth of equipment and $200,000 worth of their customers' property on that equipment, and they get a towing invoice, which is 5 or 6 times what the usual towing invoice is, and the towing company says, pay it or your truck stays here. And oh, by the way, I'm charging you $300 a day for storage. Then instead of having a 4-year legal process to collect a bad receivable, that small trucking company is out of business because their equipment and their cargo, and they're being sued by their customer for loss of the cargo. So I appreciate that this is a very difficult situation. And this whole process has come about because a very few people are abusing the market force, the market process that we already have. I've looked back over my information for the last few years, and the vast majority of the tows and recoveries that are done for my company, and we're a large company, not big like national, but pretty good size, the vast majority are reasonable. We pay them, it's done. 5 or 10 of those out of the last couple of years, maybe 15, have been so outrageous that they just shock you. You would expect to get a bill for $20,000, and the bill is $90,000.
Right.
And the only reason is, well, I don't charge $1,500 for a rotator. I charge $9,000 for a rotator, and the police called me and told me to wait for 8 hours while they did other things before they let me go in. So there are abuses being perpetrated, and that's why we need the help, because we don't have the right to contract for it, so there's a good reason for that.
Thank you. What I would say before I go to the next person is, well, you know what, let me just go. Please.
Nancy Egan, representing the American Property Casualty Insurance Association. Obviously, not every tow is going to be covered by one of our members. The vehicle may be uninsured, but we hope that there is cooperation from the parties involved so that there's some definitive costs that we can do when we're settling claims to be able to see what the rates are. So we appreciate the work of this work group, and we hope we can be helpful.
So Nancy, what I'm hearing you say, and what I'm hearing a lot of people allude to either directly or indirectly, that having these costs down on paper so everybody knows exactly what they're getting into and there's as little ambiguity as possible on all sides serves all sides.
Yes, that's correct. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think, unless there's anything else, that is going to conclude the hearing today. I want to thank everybody. Did you have a close? Next steps, Delegate Foley. Well, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't want to preempt the chair, but I think it would be helpful, at least for me, speaking for myself, perhaps for the other legislators, if we could maybe get some ideas around this idea of, setting rate sheets, like what would that look like on a per pound billing basis? What would that look like? If we're, that might be useful for us to have that information if the parties have some ideas about that, to see what those rate sheets would look like.
Yep, so I want to thank everybody again for coming out on this rainy day. I think we made a lot of progress. We still have, particularly you all, have a lot to do, but I see a little bit of a path here that I did not see before, and I hope other people share that. So with that said, thank you, everyone. Thank you very much. Yes, sir.
Is there a possibility that we could get some staff support?
What are you envisioning as far as staff support is concerned?
Maybe a staff or policy person from one of the committees, from the committee?
Yeah, I think that would be in order.
Thank you very much.
Especially considering, and I want to reiterate that all of this is happening because we didn't have enough time to kind of work on this last session, and so the chair of ENT and JPR put together that letter specifically asking for this to take place. So I think that's in order. I will speak to the chair about it. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Please drive safely. We don't need any tows going home. Thank you very much. Take care. Happy holidays. Bye-bye. Thank you.